The maps were failing. The drones had gone dark. Radios buzzed with static as command scrambled for answers no one had. On the far edge of the landing zone, a woman leaned against the open door of a quiet K9 van. Her gloved hands still clean, her eyes fixed on a sky that was turning the wrong shade of gray. No one had asked her opinion. No one even remembered her name. But while techs tapped screens and pilots cursed the smoke, she was already reaching for the notebook no one believed mattered. The dog beside her tensed before anyone else did. She stood, fastened her gloves, and walked into the storm. There were no orders, no clearance, just the weight of knowing something no one else could see. When the Apache lifted its blades slicing through the haze, she was on board. Her hand-drawn map was the only guide they had, and her quiet voice was the only one that knew where to go. She didn't need permission. She had already made the call. Harper Vale didn't take up much space. She moved like someone used to being overlooked, always just outside the edges of attention. Her uniform was clean but faded in places, her boots worn smooth at the toe laces, double knotted like she was always ready for something that might never come. She kept her sleeves rolled up and her head low, not out of shame, but because it was easier that way. Easier to do her job without reminding anyone she was there. Around the base, they called her handler support, which really meant the woman who checked kennels and cleaned crates while the real teams geared up. But she walked with a kind of quiet grace, like someone who carried more than anyone saw. Her shoulders didn't slump, her back never bent, and her eyes never wandered. She watched always like the world might shift at any moment, and she wanted to be ready when it did. Bain, her K9 partner, was a Belgian Malinois trained for wildfire zones and urban collapse. He rarely barked. He didn't need to. One glance from Harper, one slight motion of her hand, and he moved with perfect trust. They were rarely spoken to, often forgotten, but in the quiet between drills and checklists, there was a rhythm between them, something deeper than orders and routine. She would sit on the crate beside him, thumb brushing the corner of her notebook while he stayed still, head-high, eyes forward. Most didn't know that she'd once been a firefighter, back when she still had a last name on the crew list and a radio clip to her vest, back before that night on the southern ridge when the wind turned and the smoke closed in faster than any protocol could explain. She'd made it out. Some didn't. And after that she left the front lines, not because she couldn't face it again, but because she'd learned that not all rescues came with sirens and command posts. Some happened in the quiet. Some started when no one else moved. Now she trained dogs, built maps by hand, took notes no one asked for. She didn't chase recognition. She chased certainty, the kind that came from long walks through broken terrain and listening to a dog breathe when the wind shifted. There was no award for that. No promotion, but when the smoke started curling over the ridgeline and the radios crackled with static, it wasn't the badges or stripes that knew what to do. It was her, the quiet one, with the dog, the one nobody noticed. The operations base looked like something out of a defense brochure. Sharp edges, concrete slabs, towers wired tight with antennas and heat sensors. Every corner buzzed with purpose, and every person moved like they had a mission mapped down to the second. Helicopters hovered in rhythm. Drones rolled out of cases with blinking lights. Officers leaned over digital tables, syncing feeds and calling out wind speeds without lifting their eyes from the screen. SWAT squads clumped together in loose circles, their gear black and heavy, every strap cinched with practiced care. They joked loud, slapped backs, compared loadouts like football stats. Rank badges shimmered on their shoulders, clean and confident. Harper stood near the crates at the edge of it all. No badge, no call sign, just a handler label stitched in small black letters. Her duty was written on a checklist, not called over the radio. They didn't speak to her. Not really. Maybe a passing joke about dogs fetching coffee. A smirk when someone noticed she was still standing there, still watching. She wasn't cleared for the mission board. Her map wasn't uploaded. The route she marked in pencil that morning wasn't on any of the drone grids. That didn't surprise her. She'd stopped expecting to be included months ago. Instead, she checked and rechecked harnesses, ran her fingers along crate locks, cleaned carabiners already clean. Her hands moved with purpose even if no one else saw one. The command tent sat at the center of the base, lit from inside by glowing tablets and the constant flicker of satellite feeds. Inside, officers tracked data like it was gospel. Not one of them turned when she passed. She could have spoken up. She had the notes, the markers, the field survey from last season. but there's only so many times you raise a hand before you stop lifting it at all. Her dog stayed quiet beside her, ears sharp, body still, ready just like she was, watching the tree line while the others watched their screens. When the wind shifted, she felt it before the flags moved, a pressure in the air subtle but wrong. No one noticed, no one asked. They were too busy rerunning drone logic, too confident in their algorithms, too sure nothing could go wrong. Not here, not with all this tech. Harper stood alone near the van map folded tight in her pocket. She wasn't part of the chain of command. She wasn't even in the loop. But her boots were planted and her dog was watching. That was enough. One of the guys from SWAT tossed the line over his shoulder loud enough for the others to hear. Said something about crate duty and emotional support units. Laughed like it was clever, like it wasn't aimed straight at her. Another chimed in, nodding toward Bain with a smirk. Asked if he was any good at fetch or just there to make her feel better about being left off the mission board. She didn't answer, and they didn't wait. In the mess tent, one of the techs had made a joke about leash checks and coffee runs. Nobody corrected him. The others just kept eating. She walked past the comm trailer once holding her folded map, and someone called out without looking. Said logistics was supposed to stick to spreadsheets. Said if they needed a real opinion, they'd ask someone with clearance. Nobody ever said her name. They called her handler or support or dog girl. Not cruel exactly, just constant. The kind of steady noise that tells you to stay small. Her notebook sat on the bench beside her corners, bent pages filled with notes no one requested. She'd drawn the ridgeline again that morning, annotated wind shifts and fallback risks. Nobody cared. The worst part wasn't the jokes. It wasn't the way they looked past her when she walked by. It was how normal it had become. How even the new recruits picked up on it, like ignoring her was just part of the job. She didn't flinch anymore. Didn't speak up. But every time they laughed, every time someone talked like she wasn't there, Bain's ears would flick. Just a little. Just enough. Like he noticed what they didn't. Harper's map didn't come from a satellite. It came from walking the ridge herself twice last spring when the fire season was just starting to shift. She'd seen the cracks in the stone shelf, felt the way the air funneled between those walls when the wind changed. She marked those things down not just on the printed maps but in pencil on hand-drawn diagrams. Arrows for pressure drift, circles for collapse points, a red box where she'd written unstable if wind shifts east. She folded that map 3 times and tucked it into her side pocket, same place every time. It had never once been requested for review. They used digital overlays and thermal scans. Her notes didn't match their formats. Still, every morning she reviewed it, added updates from overnight weather, adjusted her markers when the smoke pattern changed. She wasn't guessing. She was observing. That corridor they were planning to fly through had narrowed last month. A mudslide had blocked the fallback route. No drone could clear it now. She knew that. But the screen said green, so no one questioned it. She didn't need credit, but there was a weight to knowing the risk and still being ignored, to watching a team walk straight into a blind zone because no one looked at the margin notes on a page she never stopped carrying. It wasn't ego, it was experience. And when Bain sat up beside her, ears turned toward the trees, she didn't have to ask what he heard. She already knew what was coming. The map had told her days ago. The van was quiet except for the low whine of the portable fan by her feet. Harper sat with her elbows on her knees, watching the field through the open side panel. The wind had picked up a little, carrying the smell of pine smoke and something sharper, something chemical. Bain lay stretched across the floor beside her, body relaxed, but not asleep. His eyes followed the horizon like hers did, steady, waiting. She reached down and let her fingers rest against his back, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. She had already checked everything, every harness, every latch, every clip. Her gloves sat folded beside her palms, still clean. No one had told her to gear up. No one would. That was fine. She didn't train for the moments when everything went right. She trained for the quiet space between planning and panic, the part where instinct takes over and you move because you can't not. A photo tucked into her notebook's back cover showed a younger version of her, helmet in hand, ash streaked across her cheeks. That was the year she stopped counting saves and started counting seconds. Back when the ridge gave way and the crew scattered and she stood at the edge, shouting names that didn't echo back. After that, she left the engine crew, took up handler work. People assumed she'd stepped down. She never corrected them, let them believe whatever helped them sleep. But she never stopped training. She learned wind patterns, thermal drift, canyon acoustics. She walked routes until the soles of her boots wore thin. She taught herself how to read smoke like skywriting. Bain had come to her a year later, still rough from his last handler. They bonded in silence. He learned her rhythms. She learned his stillness. Now he could read the air better than any sensor on base. She watched the digital map flicker through the window of the command tent. They were running updated overlays again, tracking flight paths and terrain readouts. She already knew it wouldn't hold. The wind was curling low, drawing smoke into the base of the canyon like breath before a shout. She opened her notebook. The page with the hand-drawn corridor had a fresh smudge near the bottom edge. She traced it gently, then folded the page back and set it down. The cracked comm tag sat untouched beside it. Bain shifted beside her. Not a full move. Just enough to say he was ready. She reached out, checked the tension on his vest, then looked toward the tree line. No sound. No warning. But the sky had gone flatter. She stood up slowly, boots firm against the floor. The leash clipped short in her hand. No one called her name. No one would. That was never why she kept preparing. The signal dropped without warning. 1 second the drone feed was rolling smooth thermal scans showing safe passage. The next the screen went black and the grid began to flicker. Inside the command tent, voices layered over one another. A captain barked for GPS coordinates. A tech tried to reboot the satellite link. No one knew why the visual collapsed that fast. The canyon was choking on smoke. Visibility dropped in seconds. Radios buzzed with static punctuated by clipped reports that made less sense the longer they played. Words like overload, firewash, signal loss. They hadn't accounted for the wind shifting this quickly. The valley had turned into a funnel pulling smoke down instead of pushing it out. The same thing Harper had written in red pencil days ago. She stood at the edge of the tent, notebook in hand, watching it all unfold. No one looked her way. No one asked what she thought. They were too busy scrambling. Bain sat beside her, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the tree line. She felt the moment it changed. A subtle drop in pressure. A silence between gusts. It was coming faster than the model said it would. One of the comms officers shouted across the room. The last drone had gone down near Grid 4. No visual, no return ping. Just silence. Another voice cut in. They couldn't confirm if the evac team was even alive. Harper stepped back from the tent. She didn't need to be in the middle of the noise. She needed clarity. At the van, she reopened the notebook and traced the line she'd drawn that morning. A narrow shelf. The last safe pass before the heat inverted. It wouldn't hold for long. Not with this wind. Not with the draft pulling from both ends. If they didn't move now, no one was getting out. Bain let out a low, steady growl. She looked up. The trees were bending the wrong way. The sky had turned too still. Everyone inside the command center was still waiting for fresh data. She already had what they needed. The route. The access point. The window that hadn't closed yet. She stared at the Apache across the field. Its rotors were idle but ready. She closed the notebook, clipped it shut, and looked down at Bain. He was no longer growling. He was waiting. So was she, and she knew there wasn't a second left to waste. Harper clipped Bain's leash to her belt, picked up the notebook, and walked straight toward the helicopter. No one called her. No one gave permission. But she wasn't waiting anymore. The Apache was idling on the pad crew, standing around with their gear half-packed. They weren't prepping to fly. They were shutting down. She stepped up to the bay and held out the map. At first, the co-pilot laughed. Something about backseat drivers and coloring books. The pilot took the notebook anyway, flipped it open. His eyes shifted once, then twice. "This route isn't on our overlay," he said. She pointed to the shelf line, explained the pressure shift, the wind draft, the reversal forming in the canyon. He didn't speak right away. Then he gave a short nod and turned to his team. "Mount up." The crew moved fast after that. She climbed in without looking back. Bain settled beside her, harness tight. His ears twitched with each shift in air. The bird lifted rotors, chopping hard smoke, curling up and closing in. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. Visibility dropped almost instantly. The ground flickered in and out. The nose dipped low. Harper pressed one hand to the wall, feeling every tilt and lean. She called out drift markers, told them where the shelf would rise, where to cut speed. The pilot followed without arguing now. The map wasn't on any screen, but it was right. Below them, the canyon twisted like a dark ribbon, too narrow, too hot, but just enough space if they hugged the left edge and kept low. Harper leaned forward, scanning the smoke. Bain moved first. A sharp bark, then stillness. He pressed his paws to the side rail, nose lifted. Harper stepped up beside him, looked down. At first there was nothing. Then a flicker. A glint of something metallic. Then a shape. Then two. Moving through the haze, slow and dragging something behind them. "They're alive," she said, voice steady. The pilot dropped into hover. The gunner locked eyes with her. They brought the aircraft down level low enough to spot the rest of the team. 4 figures, 1 stretcher, all covered in soot. One waved, then pointed. The others moved fast, lifting the injured man as the cable dropped. Harper helped clip them in. No one cheered, no one shouted. The air was too thick, too loud. But in that moment, everything held. Everything worked. She watched each man rise into the bay. The last one collapsed against the wall, hand over his chest, breathing shallow. Harper stayed near the ramp until the final latch clicked. Only then did she sit back down beside Bain. Her gloves were soaked. Her map was covered in ash. But her team, the one no one thought she had, was alive. The Apache touched down with a soft thud, its skids pressing into the scorched concrete. Dust rose around the pad, swirling in slow spirals as the blades began to slow. The sun sat low behind the haze, casting a flat orange light over the field. No one spoke at first. A quiet line of crew members stood along the edge of the tarmac. They weren't cheering. They weren't clapping. They just watched. One by one, the SWAT team stepped out. Faces blackened, shoulders slumped, boots burned at the edges, but they walked. They were alive. The stretcher came next. 2 men carried it, moving carefully, hands shaking but steady. The man on it was breathing, faint but there. Then came Harper. She stepped down slow, 1 foot at a time, her boots cracked near the toes. Ash clung to her sleeves. Her gloves were streaked with soot, but she held herself the same as always, quiet, balanced. Bain stayed at her side. His coat was darkened with smoke, but his steps were light. His leash hung loose between them, not pulling. Just enough to show they were connected. She didn't scan the crowd, didn't look for approval. She just moved toward the van with the same calm she'd carried into the canyon. A figure stepped forward, one of the officers who'd joked earlier, the one who'd called her crate boss. His vest was clean. He hadn't gone into the smoke. He stopped a few feet from her, pulled the SWAT patch from his shoulder, held it out without a word. She didn't take it at first, just looked at him. Then she reached forward, closed her fingers around it, gave a single nod. He stepped back, didn't say anything else. No one needed to. Others started to notice. A tech lowered his headset. A medic crossed his arms, frowning at the ground. Not in anger, in something quieter. Maybe regret. The base commander stood near the steps of the trailer, arms folded, eyes following her as she passed. He called out her name, the one no one used until now. She turned once, waited. He said they were wrong. She didn't argue. She just said she was exactly where she needed to be. Then she kept walking. There were no cameras, no applause, just the sound of boots on hard concrete and the low whine of cooling engines. At the van, she opened the door. Bain jumped in and curled on his blanket tail tucked close. She sat beside him, pulled off her gloves, and looked at the SWAT patch in her hand. She didn't pin it, didn't hold it up. Just set it down beside her and rested one hand lightly over it. Outside, the base slowly moved again. People returned to their work. Voices picked up. But every so often someone looked toward the van. Not to ask for help, not to issue orders, just to acknowledge the one who had gone in when no one else could, the one who didn't need a title to lead. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one no one sees until it's too late to look away. Harper Vale never asked for credit. She just stayed ready, and when it mattered, she went.